Welcome to Expat Exchange's Let the Adventure Begin, where we explore life abroad with the people who make it extraordinary. Today's special guest is Greg Gunter from Berkshire Hathaway's Colonial Home San Miguel. He is known as the Dream Pro and San Miguel's Dream Home Expert, and he's the #2 realtor in all of Mexico based on sales volume. He's also one of the elite 100 agents internationally, and with a background in architecture and a passion for real estate that began at the age of 5. Greg brings unmatched expertise to San Miguel de Allende's luxury market. With years of expertise, a deep understanding of local real estate, and a passion for client service, Greg brings a unique perspective on real estate, lifestyle, and what makes San Miguel such a magical place to live. Welcome to Let the Adventure Begins, Greg.
Hey, Josh, thanks for having me. I love the tagline, Let the Adventure Begin. It's quite an adventure living here in San Miguel de Allende. I love it.
I'm sure it is, and that's where we want to start. Let's go back even a little bit further. Let's talk about your life before you moved to Mexico. Can you just give us your story?
Sure, I'll kind of tell the viewers kind of full circle here how I got into becoming a realtor. I've been building homes since I was 15. My dad was a carpenter, so I've been in residential, building homes, and my bio will say I've been connecting buyers and sellers since 1974 because that's when I was 15, and we would, we would build a spec home and use that as a model and find other buyers to say, okay, we can custom build you a home and change the materials. So I've been kind of connecting buyers and sellers and building custom homes since I was 15. I then went on to become an architect. I got, my architecture degree, and I work in the residential industry for my first few years as an architect. But ironically, most of my career was a retail developer. I spent most of my career as a retail developer. So I would do those large, lifestyle centers and regional malls, and I helped build that large project, mixed-use project in Los Angeles called Hollywood and Highland, where they do the Academy Awards.
Oh, wow.
I was part of that team. Yeah, really
That's
unusual,
incredible.
huh? Yeah, so that was kind of my background, working a lot of hours as a retail developer. And we probably will get into this later in the interview, but when I moved down here, that was all behind me. This little thing called the Great Recession happened. And my
Yes.
company would belly up, and I came down here not having a clue what I was going to be doing. So that was my background before I got down here.
Oh, wow. So did you have any concerns or questions about whether or not, moving to Mexico was the best choice for you?
Not really. Mexico has a pretty good a reputation as being, well, it is the #1 expat destination. Obviously that makes sense because we abut America. It's a nice, part of why I made the decision to move down here in the first place. I thought I was still going to be running my old company. So I wanted to be in the same time zone, so I was in the same time zone. I'm a 2-hour flight away from, the airports in Texas. So it would have been easy for me to fly back and take care of my business even from down here. Most of it is virtual anyway. When I needed to meet a client, it was easy to get back. So I really didn't have any concerns from that standpoint. It was a pretty easy decision. And again, I don't know if we're going to get into this later in the interview, but the decision about where to be in Mexico, that was kind of the challenge. And I spent my last couple of years of high school growing up in central Arkansas in that heat and humidity, and said, I'm never living in that humidity ever again. So that ruled out the coast, because I knew I wanted to be here full time. So that ruled out the coastal communities. And the only two inland communities are the Lake Chapala area and San Miguel.
Yep.
And we'll talk a little more about San Miguel and why it won out over Lake Chapala. But both of them have great reputations from a safety and welcoming experience from an expat perspective. So I really didn't have any concerns about moving down here.
And what about, just leaving the United States? Was that, I mean, it's great. A lot of expats have this, sense of adventure and they want to go and experience something new. Was that what was driving it?
I really, what was initially driving my was that I wanted to, I thought I wanted to well, I did. I wanted to semi-retire at the age of 50. So I started this investigative process, at the age of about 47, 48, something like that. Wanted to be down here semi-retired at the age of 50.
Yep.
So that's kind of what generated that. I made the 50 timeline, but this thing called the Great Recession happened, and I didn't quite make the
Yeah.
semi-retirement thing. So I moved down here. This is an interesting point for a lot of expats that are kind of a little maybe nervous or uncertain about, moving to a foreign location. I kind of had that Buddhist philosophy of leap and the net will appear. And that's truly what I did. I came down here. I admittedly had already started building a home here and planning a life here before the Great Recession happened. So I had a home waiting for me. It was already had just recently been finished. And, my old company went belly up in March of 2009, and the home was waiting for me down here. And I said, well, I guess that's a sign.
Right.
It's time for me to move to San Miguel. I had no clue what I was going to be doing down here because I did still need to work. Unlike a lot of expats that move down here, this is a retirement destination for many people or a second home destination.
Yes.
For me, it was a full-time residential move, to move down here full-time, but I still needed to work. So I kind of joke I'm one of like 6 gringos in all of San Miguel that still work.
It's interesting on Expat Exchange, we get a lot of people who come through and that, I'm too young to retire. Is it possible to work down there? And that's where it gets a little tricky in a lot of countries, whether or not you can move and, take a job from the local economy and everything. So,
But I'll address that real quick if you want, Josh. But your best if you do still need to work. I've had clients that still do like coding online for their tech company in the U.S. And of course, you can do that from anywhere. We have fiber optic internet down here, so you've got great internet connection. That's easy to do, but to come down and try to work for someone else is a little bit more of a challenge. So your best option is to do what I did and start my own business. Come down and start your own business. That is supported more by the Mexican government. I think any country would be that way, but Mexico in particular, because you're employing other Mexicans. So I
right.
now run a real estate agency where I employ, 10 other people. They're able to make a living partially because of me. And so that's supportive. The Mexican government will support that kind of enterprise.
Right. That's great. You're creating jobs instead of taking them. So it makes
Yeah,
perfect sense.
exactly.
It's fantastic. Okay. So, you talked about your story. So how many years have you been there specifically?
I moved here full time in 2009, March of 2009. So
Okay.
at this point, we're now, and I don't know, I don't want to date the interview, but we're in the spring of 2025. I've been here 16 years full time.
As you were settling into life in Mexico, what were some of the biggest challenges for you and what was, the most surprising?
I spoke 3 words of Spanish when we moved here, so that is a good thing because that's a concern for some of my clients that are thinking of San Miguel. And we're a very bilingual community here, but what I kind of joke with my clients about what we love, those of us that love that live here in San Miguel and love it, is that if you go to Cancun or Cabo or Puerto Vallarta or those coastal communities, the waiter walks up to you and says, "Hi, I'm Jose. I'll be your waiter tonight." And here he walks up and says that in Spanish first. If he realizes that you're struggling with your Spanish, then he'll switch to English to help you out. But we know that we're not living in Miami Beach here because it is kind of a more of a Spanish language based culture, but most everyone here is bilingual. So not knowing that much Spanish is not that big of an impediment. I still don't speak that good of a Spanish 16 years later, to be
Mhm.
honest with you. But you don't need to be that good. I do tell my clients the less Spanish you speak, the more of a barrier there is between you and the local community, the workers, your maid, for instance. But it's 2025. Like my maid doesn't speak a word of English, but she's got the app on her phone. She's young enough to know how to use an app on her phone. So she will text me. She'll type it in Spanish, translate it to English, and then she'll text me in English. So, it's a lot easier now than it was when I first moved here. We didn't even have Google Maps when I first moved here. Can you imagine? I was trying to get
Wow.
around Mexico with no Google Maps, opening the big map and trying to read it, and
Yep.
So integrating with life in Mexico is much easier at this era than it was when I first moved here.
It's funny you mentioned that. The first podcast episode I ever did was with a good friend of mine, and he had spent 17 years in Tokyo. And when he first showed up in Tokyo and there was no Google Maps, and he obviously had never taken any Japanese in school or anything like that, and he had to rely on local maps and everything. Very difficult. So a similar experience. You hear that a lot. People saying, "I can't imagine if I didn't have Google Maps to navigate life here."
I had the old fashioned, the stack that was this thick of all the maps in the car
Yeah.
trying to and you can imagine me and my bad Spanish trying to ask for directions, when I was driving to another city. It was a bit of a challenge, but much, much easier now. So, we're getting more people moving down here now in this generation where it's much easier to integrate into the culture down here with a lot of those tools and translation tools, and signage is way better than it used to be. It's a more of a little more of a bilingual community even than when I first moved here 16 years ago. So yeah, it's much easier to integrate with the culture and the community now than it was back then.
Yep. Absolutely. So what if there were a few things that you wish you had known before you moved to San Miguel, what would you say they were?
So we're kind of jumping around topics here a little bit,
Yeah.
but one of your questions was, how have you adjusted? This is kind of your question about how have I adjusted. My last name is Gunter, so you can kind of guess Gunter. That's a very German name, right? I have a lot of
Yes.
German characteristics. I'm very timely. I'm very organized. I'm very efficient, and that doesn't always mesh real well with life in Mexico. Life here runs at a much gentler and easier pace. We all joke about the mañana attitude. Mañana doesn't mean tomorrow, it just means not today. So when the worker goes, "Oh, I forgot to bring my hammer," even though I always knew I was going to be hammering nails, I forgot to bring my hammer. I'll be back mañana with my hammer. Well, really, he's not going to be back tomorrow. It could be 2 or 3 days before he comes back. So
Hmm.
that's a little bit of a challenge, is adjusting to that pace of life. Most of my clients are retired, so it doesn't really matter that much to them. When you're running a business down here, it's a little bit more of a challenge when you're trying to run a business. One of my clients, and he's kind of a friend, is a Swiss guy. They're even worse than Germans. They're very, he runs a restaurant and he goes, "It drives me crazy trying to run a restaurant in this bit, in this country, because nothing's on time, but he's been here as long as I have and he still loves it." So, you acclimate to that pace of life, and it becomes a much gentler a way of living. I joke with my clients that we have what we call the random Aztec parade factor. So you'd be driving to go pick up clients and you think you're on time, and suddenly the block is shut down because some little Aztec tribe has gotten a permit to have a 15-minute parade and to do their little dances in the street kind of thing. And you're stuck. You're just stuck in traffic. You're like, "Okay, what do I do?" You just sit
Right.
back and enjoy it.
It's like in a James Bond movie where they get cut off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a small town here, one-way streets, and the guy may be filling the gas tank and you're just stuck behind the gas truck for a little while. That's the pace
So
of life. You acclimate to it. You acclimate to it. It's a much less stressful life.
right. So you mentioned that it's a small city. It's not like Mexico City or anything like that. So what does that mean for being part of the expat community there? What's that like?
We're a city of about 170,000 people, and we probably have about 30,000. We don't have an exact count, but I
Hmm.
know we've issued over, at least 3 years ago, we'd issued 23,000 SRE permits, which means at least 23,000 gringos have purchased homes here, and we have a lot of people that rent here. So we probably have 30 to 35,000 Americans that live here.
Wow.
So in a little town, and when I say 170,000 people, we're like because I lived in a city that size in Western Colorado. It was spread out. You had to get in a car to go everywhere. We're like a little European village. So I have a car that's 2.5 years old. I just put 8,400 miles on that car in 2.5 years. We walk everywhere here. So being a small town and having that kind of concentration of expats here means that you walk across town, you're going to probably, if you think it's going to be a 10-minute walk, you're going to probably run into 3 people that you know. So, count on it being a double that walk time, because you're going to run into 3 people that you're going to chat with just a little bit. Same thing. I joke with my clients, you're not going to go to the grocery store in your robe because you're going to run into at least 2 people in the grocery store that you know. But we love that. That's what we love about it. It's a very warm and inviting and welcoming community. I mean, the locals as well, but there's also, it's very easy to meet other people, especially in my community, because it's such a warm and welcoming expat community here.
Funny, the way you talk about it makes me think about the way some people will talk about a college campus, how people, you start to recognize people. She was in my geometry class, like whatever. Yeah,
I also joke that, we call this Little Manhattan. So if you've ever
right.
lived, visited Manhattan very much, you know how a borough, I mean, you can live in a Manhattan, which is one of the biggest cities in the world, but you live in a borough within Manhattan, right? So, the dry cleaner guy knows you by name, the taco guy knows you by name, that, your favorite Indian restaurant, they know you by name when you walk in. And it's the same thing here. Everybody gets to know you, personally. And the reason I call it Little Manhattan is in Manhattan, you walk to the next borough and you've got 4 more theaters and 42 more restaurants. We have that all here in the same community, so we always have a great amount of activity going on. We have 650 restaurants in this little town of 170,000 people. It's amazing
It's
the
incredible.
opportunities and the well, I'll segue off just a little bit here, Josh, but a lot of what I tell my clients is we have the largest social English language social and cultural infrastructure of anywhere in Mexico. So there's always tons to do here in town. So again, you're going to run into people that at the theater, you're going to run into them at a music performance, you're going to run into them at the opera. So we have, we love that. That's really the fun thing about this community.
Well, that's one of the most alluring things. I've never been to San Miguel, but I really want to go there. And one of the most alluring things to me is the art community there, the arts community.
Yeah.
It's you just hear about it all the time, and it's been that way it's not like that's a new thing. It's been that way for decades. If I'm
It's actually been that way since the late 40s and early 50s. So I'll segue off a little bit and give you a little history on San Miguel. But the way that San Miguel got put on the Americans map is an American beauty queen, an Arkansas beauty queen, moved here in the late 40s. The mayor of San Miguel fell in love with her. He was married and a Catholic, so he got divorced as a Catholic. That's a no-no if you're
Yeah,
in
that's a
politics.
no-no.
Yeah, he lost his political career, and they said, "What are we going to do?" And they opened up an art school, and because she was American, she knew to market to the GIs that were coming out of World War II. They would get a $500 a month stipend for education, so they could come down to Mexico and take art classes and live like a king for $500 a month. Rent back then was $15 a month, and a beer was a nickel a beer, and they could live like kings down here, and a lot of them stayed. They'd come down here and take art classes and ended up staying. So we've been on the radar of Americans, especially artistic oriented Americans, since the late 40s and early 50s. So yeah, it's been a very artistic community for a very long time. We have a lot of overlap with communities like Santa Fe, New Mexico, for instance. Very
Mhm.
artistic. Austin, Texas, New Orleans, very artistic communities. There are a lot of people from those communities like coming down here because it's a very similar kind of thing. You could probably go to an art gallery opening 3 nights or 4 nights a week here.
That's incredible. And the architecture too, obviously. You don't have to look at many pictures of San Miguel to just be taken by what's built there.
So I fell in love with San Miguel in the first 24 hours. My first visit was in 2001. And I went, man, I knew in the first 24 hours, this is where I wanted to live. That's because I'm an architect. And I fell in love with the architecture of the city, not knowing anything else about it. I didn't know anything about that social and cultural infrastructure that I just mentioned, because how can you in the first 24 hours? You need to be here for a little while to learn, oh, there's 3 theater groups and but the architecture here we're one of the richest architectural cities in all of Mexico. Part of that is because we're on the silver route. So the Spaniards that were mining silver in nearby Guanajuato, this was their first overnight stop. So after breaking their back and, earning, a couple of wagon loads of silver, they'd stop here for their first night and they'd finally get a chance to sit down and rest and have a tequila and go, I'm a millionaire in 1600. I'm a millionaire in 1600. I'm going to build a mansion or I'm going to build a cathedral. And because of that, we're one of the richest architectural cities in Mexico. Beautiful architecture.
It's just looks so stunning when you see the videos and the pictures and everything. It's like, how can
And,
you not want to go
Josh,
there?
that overlaps into the architecture here.
Right.
So if I can segue into that a little bit, we're
Yes,
really getting
let's please.
Yeah, we're really getting way off script here. So viewers, we did have a little bit of a script here, but we're getting way off script here. We're just kind of making it up. But that architecture overlaps into the residential component as well.
Hmm.
So what I tell my clients is, nothing is from a box in San Miguel. You go to especially like Southern California or places like that, and people go, "Oh, I've got a $4 million home," and you go visit it, and everything is from Home Depot, and it looks just like the cookie cutter box next door. Down here, everything is custom crafted. So you get that, everything's all masonry. There's no stick and brick. There's no drywall. Everything's stucco and masonry. There's a lot of natural stone, a lot of wrought iron, a lot of natural materials down here. Terracotta or stone flooring, carved cantera, ornate carved cantera pieces that you can see. Even the religious architecture has overlapped into the residential architecture a little bit. So almost everybody has a powder bath with a little sink in the powder bath that looks like a replica of a baptismal font. It's
Oh,
just been
wow.
turned into, yeah, it's just been turned into a little sink. It's really cool. You see a lot of clamshell details in the architecture here too, and that's a spillover from the Catholic religion here in San Miguel because we don't really have any water nearby. They bring a bucket of water, and the way that they baptize the indigenous Indians, where they dip a clamshell into the bucket of water and pour a little clamshell of water over the Indian's head. So the clamshell detail you'll see in a lot of churches, a lot of religious architecture, and that's segued over into residential. So we'll use that as a detail in little nichos and hallways and decorative elements. Will have these clamshell details built into it. It's really cool.
That's amazing. So much character, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. That's why I say, in the United States, when you go looking for a home, you go, well, we liked Plan A that was a pink facade and Plan C that was the blue facade, because it's basically the same floor plan. And down here, I tell my clients, you really have to do a pro and con list when you're looking at homes because they're all vastly different. We do not have developers down here that build 100 home or even a 20 home development. Everything here is one off. So it's a very unique, everything home here is very unique.
And if you go and you buy a second home in a place like Mexico and San Miguel, you want it to be unique, and it turns it into more of a special experience, I think, to own it.
And that's the interesting thing down here. You don't have to be in the $1 million level to get that kind of unique Spanish colonial architecture. Even a starter home that's going to be three, four, $500,000 will have a lot of those Spanish colonial details. The difference might be that with $1 million and up home, your carved canteras might be a little more elaborate. Maybe you'll have a little bit more elaborate wrought iron instead of just basic wrought iron. It's going to be fancier and have more details to it and things like that. That's where the cost factor comes in. That you'll still get those basic details at a starter level price, but when you get into a seven-figure home, it's just more elaborate.
It's amazing. So great for everyone then, right?
Exactly. That's the wonderful thing. And another thing I tell my clients, I've got a great YouTube channel. And for instance, I downscaled a couple of years ago into a penthouse condo. And in my condo complex, I moved into this because it does look very Mexican. We've got roof tiles that are, Spanish colonial terracotta roof tiles, and a lot of stone and cantera in my condo complex. But when I used to bring clients in to see these condos, they go, that looks too American. If I wanted that, I'd just stay in the United States. And I said, well, that's what that profession called architecture is for. You can turn an American looking condo or home or whatever, if it looks too American for you, have a local architect who's very affordable come in and, add some of those materials and changes that can make it look like whatever you want. My little home, if you watch my YouTube channel, I'm the Dream Pro. So if you are the Dream Pro Homes on YouTube, I did a Good Bones makeover series, and you'll see what my condo looked like before. You go, ooh. And you look at it now, and I built a Florentine pied a terre. So my home looks very Italian, for instance. And that's easy to do down here. If a home is not Italian enough or Mexican enough or French enough, have a local architect. And I have all those resources. I have the architects and designers and contractors to help someone create a very special, unique home down here.
Yeah, and that goes back to, really feeling like it's yours and the personal experience and having the whole process just be something that's so enjoyable for the home buyer.
Yeah, the process of looking can be a lot of fun, but then the process of putting your own thumbprint on it is much easier than in the United States. In the United States, retrofitting something, again, construction is a little different down here. So, if you went in the United States and they said, oh, I want that bay window or I want those French doors to be twice as wide, the contractor goes, oh man, that's a big job. Down here, the way that the homes are built, the structural lintel is all the way at the top of the wall. So if you said, hey, I want that French door to be, twice as wide, they go, no problem. And they just take a sledgehammer and they open up the opening because the structural lintel is all the way at the top. So retrofits and renovations here are much easier and much more affordable than they are in the United States. That's another good thing about down here.
So do the types of properties that are popular with expats, is that really defined by budget, or do you find that that's not always the case?
I would say it's more lifestyle. So your lifestyle preference is going to be what sort of dictates your budgetary range. So if you're the kind of person that says, we are, remember, like a small walkable European community, and a lot of people love that about living here. I'm one of those. I've always lived within walking distance of our town square, which is called the Jardín, and our church that's on that town square is called the Parroquia. It's like our iconic Eiffel Tower for
Mhm.
San Miguel.
Yes.
So in my Q&A booklet that I send my clients, I say property values here are based on your sight line and your walking distance to that parochial church, because that's the very heart of town. The closer you are to that, the more expensive the homes get. So if you're the kind that says, hey, I've always lived in downtown Chicago, I can walk to 42 restaurants in 4 minutes, I want that, then you're going to be at a little bit of a higher budget range. Other than, I have clients sometimes that says, I'm 84, I have a bad hip, I'm always going to take a taxi or an Uber. So it doesn't matter. I could be a little bit further out.
Okay.
And with those people, I can find, a little bit more value, a little more bang for the buck. So if you're a little further out from that walking distance radius, you can get a larger lot. You can get a home that's maybe got more details for the same value. You just get more bang for the buck a little further you're out. So it's the lifestyle component really that kind of, varies with the budget. If you're coming in at a lower budget level, you may have, like, if you said, hey, 350 is all I got, you're going to be pretty much relegated to a condo. If you said, I've got 5 or 6, then you've got a lot more options. If you said, hey, I got $1 million, I can show you a lot of different options. You can be nice and close within that walking radius. Even the 5 and 6 range, you can be within that 15-minute walking radius. But, the difference would be then, if you bump up to $1 million, you just got nicer finishes within that same walking radius.
I don't think we really plan to talk about this, but you're talking about outside the center of the city. What is that like out there compared to the center?
So there's two ways of looking at kind of outside the center, the central part of town. We have some really nice neighborhoods that are uphill. So San Miguel's like a bit like a lopsided teacup, and the east side of a town is uphill. The west side of town is a little bit uphill as well, but those are neighborhoods that haven't been gentrified. But our eastern neighborhoods, Balcones, Atascadero, and Ojo de Agua, are really nice new upscale communities. When I say new, they're only 60 years old, because remember, we're a 483-year-old UNESCO village.
Right.
So a 60-year-old community is nice and new. Those are very popular, and still within town, but because they're uphill, they're not as easy and short of a walk to get down into the Jardín. So those communities are very popular if you're not always going to be walking, or if you're open to the concept of walking downhill and taking a taxi uphill to go back home.
Mhm.
Outside of that, though, we have other communities that are really truly outside of town. We have a lot of gated vineyard communities. So, we're the
Oh, wow.
second largest wine district in all of Mexico, which is a really cool thing. It's a little bit like living in a Napa or Sonoma, right? I mean, it's got these phenomenal vineyard communities where you can feel like you're living in Tuscany. The architecture is very Tuscan looking, very beautiful, lots of stonework again. And a lot of those communities are very popular as well. And they're, sometimes a 15-minute drive outside of town. So that's kind of the difference. If you say, I don't want to see my neighbor, I want to live in a nice gated community, but I don't want to see my neighbor. We have communities that have, 5-acre parcels. You can be out there and kind of, live in a very nice community that's gated and will have some common area amenities, but might have a 5-acre parcel and you never see your neighbors. So we kind of have the full range, sort of depending on what you're looking for.
Wow. So it's so great. So there really are options for a lot of different things that people may want.
Yeah, again, depending on your lifestyle. If you're,
Yep.
like my overriding lifestyle factor is being able to walk out the door at the last minute and go, I'm going to walk down to dinner at a restaurant in 3 minutes. Some people love that I'm a big enophile too, but some people are big enophiles and go, oh, I love the idea of living in a vineyard. I don't go to eat very much. We cook a lot, so they love the concept of living in a vineyard. They produce their own wine because they have grapes and lavender and, olive trees to produce their own olive right there on their own lot. And it's okay if they don't go into town no more than once or twice a week. They love cooking from their own community there. So you kind of, yeah, that lifestyle is what when I talk with my clients, that's the first conversation I have is what is their lifestyle preference, and from there I know where to focus them on where to look for a home.
Okay. So shifting gears a little bit and getting into the nuts and bolts of buying a house in Mexico, how is that process different than, say, the United States or Canada or wherever your clients may be coming from?
I'm going to make that kind of a two-part answer for you, Josh. You may be bringing this up a little later, but I'm going to jump into it now. So one of the things for your viewers to know about San Miguel de Allende is we're in the central part of Mexico. We're 2.5
Mhm.
hours north of Mexico City. That means that you can own your home fee simple, just like in the United States in San Miguel. If you buy a condo or a home in Cabo or Puerto Vallarta or Cancun or those coastal areas, you don't own the home. You hold it through what's called a fideicomiso, which is a bank trust. So you technically don't own the home. Here in San Miguel, you own it fee simple, just like in the United States. So that's one really important factor for people to know if they're a little uncertain about the government or the economy or whatever. It's very safe purchasing and investing in San Miguel because you own the home. The process, now here's part two. You're kind of asking about the process. The process, thankfully, in San Miguel, because we have so many Americans that invest here, we're very westernized in the real estate process here in San Miguel. We have an MLS. Admittedly, it's a rudimentary MLS. It's not like the ones in the US. So we don't have a Zillow or a Redfin or Trulia or all those other tools. Unfortunately for buyers, or fortunately for us realtors, I guess, you really still need to work with a realtor to know and understand the market and get a feel of comps and values and stuff like that. But the process is very much like in the United States. We use escrow here. It's kind of a similar time frame. One of the bigger differences, or maybe two of the bigger differences, is instead of having a title company and a closing company, down here in Mexico, we have what's called a notario. And that is a federally appointed position. You have to be a real estate attorney, and then you're federally appointed. It's like a judgeship. You get it for life. And it's a federally appointed position to control these closings. So the notario has to be assured that you're getting a fee simple property that's free and clear of any liens or encumbrances. So he's just like the title company from that perspective.
Okay.
That's a big difference there, but it's just a process difference is the only thing. Another big difference is that mortgages in Mexico run about 300 to 350 basis points more than they do in the United States. So right now, a cheap mortgage in Mexico will run about 9.75%. That's a cheap mortgage.
Yep.
Mexican banks will lend at 14%, for instance, down here. So because of that, a lot of people are buying either all cash, or the way that they're funding it is they'll take out a HELOC, a line of equity credit against their home in the United States, or they'll take out a margin loan against their investment account, Schwab or Edward Jones or something like that. A margin loan is even cheaper than a mortgage. So that's another big difference, is that it tends to be an all cash transaction down here. And some people have the cash sitting around, and some people have to pull it out of the equity. They bought a home for $200,000 in, California 20 years ago, and it's worth 3 million now. So they can pull $1 million out of that, of the equity, and, with the HELOC, and spend that $1 million buying something down here. That's another big difference. It tends to be an all cash transaction down here.
Right. Wow, you did, people come and they ask all these questions on our website and you're answering so many of the questions just like bing bang boom. It's so helpful for buyers to hear all that packaged so well.
Yeah, and it's really helpful, team, if you pay attention at the end of Josh's video, he'll have contact information for me. When you contact me, one of the very first things I do is I send all my clients a 15-page Q&A info handbook. And so it answers a lot of these same kind of questions. People go, oh, can I buy a home? How do I do it? What's the process? Do I have to have a residency visa? You know, those kinds of questions. And I answer all that in this nice, succinct 15-page booklet. So that's a good thing to have if you're thinking of, exploring, you're not even certain, you just want to explore a little bit. That's a good thing to kind of request, is get this Q&A handbook that I have available for people.
Yeah, it's great too because it limits, I think with buying a house, there's always going to be some surprise somewhere, but the more those surprises get taken out of the equation, the better the experience is overall. So that's
Exactly, exactly. And when you're working with somebody in Mexico, you want to work with somebody that has a reputation. So the good thing about, San Miguel in particular is we have several of the same franchise names that you're going to be familiar with in the United States. I run a Berkshire Hathaway Home Services office, for instance, and we're an American franchise. We're not a master franchise. We are just like I was, operating out of, Irvine or
right.
Dallas or anywhere else.
Yep.
So those are the kind of people you want to work with, people that have that kind of reputation, that kind of history. There's a lot of independent people as well, but it's a little bit riskier to work with someone that's more of an independent. So that's a good thing to know, is work with a name that you're comfortable with.
Yeah, Berkshire, so many people know about Berkshire and it carries so much weight and
Everybody knows Warren Buffett, right?
exactly. Exactly. Everybody wants to be Warren Buffett or at least have his bank account anyway.
There you
Um,
go.
so when you transitioned to Mexico, and I don't think you mentioned this before, but when you got down there and you were transitioning into being a realtor down there, what was that process like for you?
Well, so that's kind of again a two-part question: transitioning to life in Mexico, and then transitioning into life as a realtor.
Right.
The transition to living down here is relatively easy, to be honest with you. We have expediters that can help you get your residency visa.
Mm-hmm.
They're very easy to get. Everybody's heard that magic phrase called a golden visa in Spain and Portugal. We have the same thing here.
Yep.
Actually, they're removing that from European places like Spain and
They are.
Portugal.
They
We
are.
still have it down here. So we still have, they don't call it a golden visa, but it's the same thing. And there's three levels of meeting that, with a real estate investment, an income, or a savings threshold. So getting that, we have a lot of expeditors that can help you with that. We have a lot of contractors, a lot of people that specifically work with people making the transition from Canada to the US. So they're called relocation experts, and we have people that do that for a living down here.
Yep.
And I can refer people to those people that help you with everything from changing your utilities to your name, to getting your residency visa, to getting your driver's license. So that's how me and everyone else that comes down, I refer them to those consultants to make that transition much easier. So that's already built in place down here to make that transition to living here. The transition as a real estate person,
Right.
when I first moved here, Josh, we didn't even have a licensing requirement, so anybody could call themselves a realtor. Unfortunately, it's still a little bit that way. We've only had a licensing requirement for about 6 or 7 years, so it's still a relatively new thing. There's about 270 licensed realtors in our little town here. We have more realtors per capita than anywhere else in Mexico. But I have an email database of about 600 people that call themselves a realtor, because again, it's sort of a loosely defined term down here. So that transition into real estate down here is a bit more of a challenge for people that might think about doing it, because it's probably a bit like real estate was in the United States in the 50s.
Right.
We don't have any bus benches to put your name on and do ads in, and we don't have a newspaper here to put an ad in. We don't have magazines down here. We don't have a mail service that you can send out mailers and postcards. It's a very, very different environment to transition into real estate down here.
Yep. Okay. And now talking about the market, are there any recent trends or shifts and it's okay if there's really not, but are there any trends or shifts that you've noticed in the last year or so that people should be aware of?
Well, if you were thinking of moving to San Miguel, I wouldn't put it off too much longer, because as I tell my clients, We've been named the #1 city in the world 5 different years by both Condé Nast Traveler and Travel and Leisure magazines.
Yep.
That means we're in the international press a lot, which means we're very popular. So I tell my clients we're going through the Aspenization process. We're turning into the
Mhm.
Aspen of Mexico. Thankfully, the school teachers and firefighters and artists can still afford to live in the same town. But my point is that appreciation has increased considerably in the last few years. So that's one of the, if you want to call it a trend that I see, is that post-COVID, we have seen a lot of appreciation. Here's a little statistic to share with you, Josh. Pre-COVID, remember I've been a realtor down here, one of the top realtors in the country, and in San Miguel, obviously, of course, for 13 years. Pre-COVID, our entire city only sold one seven-figure home a month. So we only sold a dozen homes a year in the whole city at $1 million and above. Now, post-COVID, we sell about $40 million homes and above. So our luxury market has increased here and become more expensive. Not only more of them, but they've appreciated a lot more. To give you an example, to give your readers an example, I sold a client a beautiful Spanish colonial home. It had an 18th century wall in it somewhere. Old Spanish colonial, right in the heart of Centro, a 5-minute walk to the Jardín for 1.6 million. 22 months later, she flipped it for 2.4 million. Okay. You can do
Wow.
the math on that one. That's great appreciation, right? In 22 months. So if you're looking at San Miguel, don't linger or wait too much longer because prices are appreciating, quite a fair amount. We do, thankfully, we are seeing, because we are growing, we have newer communities a little further out. People used to say, I got to be within that 15-minute walking radius. Now people are going, oh, well, my budget's only 500,000. I can walk 20 minutes, I guess, instead of 15 minutes. So we have neighborhoods that are gentrifying just a little further out that, you wouldn't have looked at 10 years ago or 8 years ago. Now you're looking at it, people are buying. I mean, there's a neighborhood that I wouldn't have taken you to 6 years ago. I just sold a home for 1.4 million in that neighborhood. It's become the
Wow.
new up and coming neighborhood because it's still within a 20-minute walk. It's got phenomenal views of the whole city, but it's something that, you wouldn't have even looked at 6 or 7 years ago. So we're seeing those kind of trends. People, new neighborhoods gentrifying, appreciation, and more luxury.
And so over, and again, this is just kind of off the cuff here. So what is the planning and the expanding and the neighborhoods that are growing out? Is that happening, or are they kind of reeling that in? You said that you lived in Colorado for a time, and I lived in Boulder for a while. And I know that in Boulder, like they're, go ahead.
I got my MBA from Boulder. I'm a buff. I'm a CU buff. So
I
you
saw
you
that. Go
probably are
Buffs.
too.
Go. I took
Yeah,
classes
really.
after I
I love it.
graduated. Yeah. I took
That's great.
three of my best friends went to CU, so I ended up
Awesome.
going out there for a while. And but they're very tight on what you can do in Boulder. Like, there's the housing they've locked down in terms of building new houses and everything. What's it like? Do you see that happening eventually, or are they still open to pushing out further?
We are pushing out further. So there's kind of, again, two prongs to that. So remember, we're UNESCO World Heritage Village.
Right.
Most of the UNESCO sites in Mexico are a pile of rubble out in the middle of the jungle. It's what used to be an old pyramid. I live, work, and play in a UNESCO zone. That's really, really rare that you can live, work, and play in a UNESCO zone. In Paris, only the banks of the Seine is a UNESCO zone, for instance.
Hmm.
Here, the majority, or maybe a third to a half of Centro, is a UNESCO zone. There, it's very controlled within that UNESCO zone. You can't change the facade. It's very
Hmm.
limited what you can do with the home there. But further out, once you get outside the UNESCO zone, which is, admittedly a relatively small area of the city, it's much more flexible. So you have a lot more flexibility as to what you can build. We still have height requirements, but as far as what it can look like, those kinds of things, there's a lot more flexibility. And of course, the neighborhoods, like I just mentioned, that you might not have looked at 6, 7, 8 years ago are becoming gentrified. So something that might used to have been a purely Mexican neighborhood, more and more people are moving into it and going, hey, I can still walk to Centro from here. I love that concept and I got great views. So the city is allowing that gentrification to occur further out. So yeah, we still allow that. Simply because of our geography, we will be geographically bounded a bit, just like Boulder is bounded by the flat irons. You can only go so
Yep.
far west and you get into, vertical flat irons. Our geography here will limit that a little bit here as well, but we are expanding, especially to the north and south of town, a little bit further out, and the city is allowing that. They're controlling that, thankfully. But
Right.
yes, we are seeing that kind of growth.
Well, I think, talking about the future and the trends and is a great way to wrap up. And this has been so helpful for people, not just understanding what it means to Mexico, but to really appreciate why San Miguel is so special and what the process would be like for moving there. So we greatly appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, Greg.
Happy to do it. It's fun to talk to people. I joke that being a realtor in San Miguel is I get to be tour guide and historian also. And I'm an architect, so I love doing that. As I'm driving around showing people homes, I'm like, and this building was built in 1642, and they used to house this family. It's fun to kind of tell people about the lifestyle. So, team, if you're looking and you're just curious about San Miguel, I'm not a hard seller. People just want to know what's it like to live there. I wonder if I could make the transition. I love to talk to people about the lifestyle here. So that's an easy thing to do. Reach out to me if you're curious to know a little bit more about, moving to Mexico, or especially San Miguel, because of course I know a lot more about San Miguel than other parts of Mexico. But don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or want to learn more about the process. I'm happy to share that with the viewers.
We'll make sure that everybody knows how to find you and where you are and find all your socials and everything. But we'll have to have you back to talk about more of those other parts of town, because the cultural and the activities and everything is just part of the fun once you have your dream home.
Love to do it. Love to talk about, we didn't really get into the lifestyle very much, but I talked about those 650 restaurants and, the piano bars and the nightclubs. And I mean, there's so much to do here that we should do another one just about the lifestyle in San Miguel.
Absolutely. So let's not say goodbye. Let's just say until next time.
Until next time. Hasta la próxima, you would say in Espanol. Hasta la próxima.
It's great. Thanks so much, Greg.
Thanks
Take
so
care.
much.
Yep. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
And that concludes this episode of Let the Adventure Begin. You can learn more about Greg on his YouTube channel, which is San Miguel Dream Pro Homes. On Instagram and Facebook, you'll find him at Dream Pro Homes. And his website is dreamprohomesluxury.com. We will be featuring video of this episode on expatexchange.com and all of our social media accounts, including our YouTube channel, which is Expat Exchange. So that will be coming in the very near future, and stay tuned for more episodes of our podcast as we ramp up and bring you more stories, more advice, and more expertise from expats all over the world. This is Josh Wood for expatexchange.com saying thank you for listening to Let the Adventure Begin.